Today on Progressive, we got to chat with the Chamber of Progress's Jirari and Gary Winslett. Tara is the Director of Economic Analysis and a rising star in the world of public policy. Gary is an assistant professor in the Political Science Department and the International Politics and Economics program at Middlebury College, where he has taught since 2018. The two of them are currently launching an incredible new blog, The Rebuild, focusing on how Democrats can build more, lower costs, and win again. All right, Tara, Gary, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Nice to be here with you.
Well, I mean, I gotta say, it is quite an honor. After you guys launched the Rebuild, I remember seeing that post come up, and I was like, oh, shit, I gotta read into this. But obviously, as Director of Econ Analysis, and Gary having written books on trade and politics, I wanted to talk to you both about the tariffs the president announced yesterday, the blanket, long-awaited tariffs. Obviously, it's been, I want to say, a shit show, is the right way to say it, but can you talk a little bit more about what these tariffs actually mean for trade, for people, for especially people like me, like young men? Obviously, it's trade with China, it's electronic goods, but can you build on that a little bit?
Yeah. Tara, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the academic term is shit show, just from seeing just the lack of cohesiveness with this rollout. I mean, even today, you have people in the admin saying that this is a negotiation tactic. Even Trump's son put out a couple tweets about that. And then you have the actual White House itself saying that they are not backing down here. And this is just accumulation of how the entire tariff policy has been in the Trump admin. It's where they say they are going to do one thing, they make a big spectacle of it, and then they fail to communicate whether this is actually going to be a permanent standing issue or if it's something that they're just like dangling in front of the carrots of other people. But as you mentioned, yes, we have reciprocal tariffs, though I would not call them that. They aren't really tit for tat. A lot of this are quite uneven. I'm sure you even saw that island called McDonald Island, which has no residents, was even tariffed as well. So it just kind of makes no sense as to how they're doing this, but how it impacts the broader ecosystem, including jobs for everyone. I would say the uncertainty right now is taking the forefront for a lot of companies. Some companies are hoping to get exempted from this, but they're not sure if they're able to. Others are wait and see if they should pull it out or not. Like, for example, we had the Nintendo release yesterday where people were wondering what the price was going to be. And that just should not be the case. We should not be, holding our breath every second, every time something gets released, to understand, like, okay, how much is the consumer going to be upholding a lot of this cost?
Yeah, I mean, the what I would add to that is just that this is obviously going to be really bad for consumers, right? Consumers are the people who ultimately end up paying that tax on the imports. And you may not see that like literally this afternoon because the stuff on the shelf wasn't tariff, but you're definitely going to see price increases by the end of this quarter, by quarter three. That's raising prices for people. That's taking money out of your pocket. One of the estimates I saw earlier today is that the middle 50% household is like end up paying between $3,000 and $3,500 more over the course of the year for these. That's a lot of money. That's like multiple paychecks for a lot of people. That's a lot of money to be taking out of people's pockets. And the other thing that a lot of people don't think about is that tariffs aren't just bad for consumers, they're bad for workers because they raise the price of inputs. So if you're a car manufacturer, raising the price of steel and aluminum is driving up the cost of making that. And so that makes that American-made car less competitive internationally, and it makes it less attractive for the buyer domestically. And so it actually hurts manufacturing jobs. So even the things that supposedly get helped actually get hurt by these.
Well, right. I was going to say, I think a really good example of this was the Bush steel tariffs. I'm sure you both seen that paper where it's, if I remember correctly, it was like for every one job save, it passed along like $900,000 in cost, something like that.
Yeah, so I know the Bush steel tariffs super well because my dad actually worked in a steel processing facility. And so they hated the Bush steel tariffs because they were not people who, like, he literally wore a hard hat at his job. He was one of these people who, like, political ads get made about. High school educated, worked in Birmingham, Alabama. And, they imported raw steel and then they did the higher value added, which is they turned that raw steel into specialized pieces of steel that all kinds of other higher end manufacturing firms needed. Right? Like that's the thing you can actually like have decent wages at. They're not good wages in like literal raw steel production. The margins are too low. But you can do advanced steel processing and you can pay decent working class wages doing that. Well, okay, but then if you tariff all the imported steel, that actually hurts people who work in that steel processing. So yeah, I'm very familiar with how some of these things work in the steel industry.
I would like to read a quote from the Tax Foundation where they have it placed on like it's just like blue graphic and it's just easy to read. And this is something I always recommend if you're communicating the impacts of tariff policy. But just tariffs or taxes, the effects of higher steel prices, largely a result of the 2002 Bush steel tariffs, led to a loss of nearly 200,000 jobs in the steel consuming sector, a loss larger than the total employment in the steel producing sector at the time.
And that's on one sector, and it's a pretty narrow tariff compared to all of the sweeping stuff we got yesterday.
Wow. It's just one of those things where you think like, why? Like, I guess I that's the thing I can't really seem to wrap my head around, right? The whole rationale is we're going to bring jobs back, we're going to bring manufacturing back. It's like, that's okay, sure, but it seems to be pretty clear that that's not going to help. And I guess
So
what is the rationale?
I can tell you what's going on here. Imagine a castle, right? And you're the gatekeeper at the castle, and you are just super cynical and super greedy. Well, what you want to do is you want to make sure that the gate you keep is the only gate in and out of the castle, so that you can then charge however much you want. What the Trump administration is doing is erecting these super high tariff barriers and trade walls, so that then they can punch little holes in the wall, which are these exemptions that they're going to give out, and you can force businesses and whole sectors even to come begging before you. Trump loves nothing more than to force people to come kiss the ring. And so that's part of what this is about, is forcing the kissing of the ring. But there's also a second part of it, which is that they just like cronyism. And they kind of like a certain authoritarian cronyism. For years, the political right in the United States has been in love with Hungary. What does Orban do? Orban makes it so that in order to prosper as a business in Hungarian society, you have to be on the same side as the government politically. You cannot succeed as a Hungarian business if you are not friends with the Orban administration. That is what they would like to copy-paste to the United States. The only way to succeed in business is to be part of Trump's friend circle.
Mm-hmm. It's the Trump welfare standard. I also think what Tim Walz was saying yesterday is that trying to understand these tariffs, in typical admins, you would have the methodology behind it and it would make sense. But for this certain aspect, you have to have a little bit of a psychology degree to understand what he is thinking that leads him to get here, because it's just like, it's honestly economically illiterate. And it does not make sense if you go from the logic route. So you have to like go back to who Trump is as a person and follow the steps there. And like a lot of it kind of boils down to he's weirdly just a really big William McKinley fan.
His fan favorite, right? The president from the 1890s, big tariff guy. What was it? Was it the? It's not Monroe Reduction, but the conquering all of like the Western Hemisphere type, or was it the isolation? All of it just bad. But I like your point of the psychological part, because none of this makes sense. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I'm a PhD in econ, but if I can understand it, something's really wrong, right? I'm sure you both saw the math that they used to calculate the tariffs. And last I checked, throwing in a bunch of Greek letters and saying this is our formula, and then multiplying 4 by a quarter, that's not, I don't think that's how it's supposed to work. Just throwing that out there.
No, I actually felt really bad for that comms person. I was like,
Well, the other thing, too, is just like assuming that all non-tariff barriers are discriminatory is wrong. And like, it just so happens there's somebody who wrote a book on regulatory trade barriers, and it's me. And like, that's wrong. Like, they could have just called me and been like, are these a form of trade discrimination? And I could have very clearly explained to them that that is not true. That there are all kinds of regulatory trade barriers that, I mean, are a few of them discriminatory? Sure. Can some of them be? Absolutely. And, the USTR should fight them where they are. But just this blanket assumption that every non-tariff barrier amounts to discrimination is just nutty.
This is kind of a good point to pivot, seeing as how they could have called you, right? Both of you are the experts, right? They could have called you how to fix these things that they were elected on, bringing down costs, which it seems to me like that's gone out the window, but they could have called experts. So in that vein, I kind of want to pivot a little bit to the rebuild and the Chamber of Progress's work, right? I've seen a lot about, well, almost on every page, about making Democrats build and work? Kind of that general vibe, not trying to get copyrighted, but the general vibe of just making it work. And that seems to be what they were saying they were going to do, going to make these costs come down, going to fix the housing, fix, cost of living. But your institute is the one actually doing that work. Can you tell me a little bit more about the work at the Rebuild and what separates you from this, obviously, cronyism, but what the actual substantive work you're doing to make these things real?
Yeah, I like to. So you see, like a lot of this sometimes correlates with like the abundance framework, and you see Ezra Klein. He likes to make the joke a lot of dark abundance and how Trump went into this presidency saying that he is, it's the golden age, golden abundance seem like synonymous to one another. So you have like high hopes, and again, like the incumbents of the Democratic Party just were at a loss. We were facing high prices, which this admin will soon learn the same lesson. And when you have someone come in saying, I am going to offer you a different way, it's easy to see why a swing voter might believe that, especially when you sadly had the candidate who was saying they weren't going to do anything otherwise or different than the current incumbent president. And then you go on and you see that a lot of this was just an ego game for Trump. He just kind of wanted to repay a lot of the people who have betrayed him previously. And he is just not interested in governing and governing well. I like to always use the example of the CHIPS Act, because if you were someone who really wanted to revitalize the manufacturing industry, you would be looking at a lot of bipartisan programs like the CHIPS Act, but he had a major issue with the allocation process, which is why it was very entailed with the DEI processes. He wasn't a fan of that. Some people can find that understandable. If it's very hard to allocate the program that you want to make work, that's fine. Logical solution would be to reform the allocation process, but for him, he would rather just repeal it and throw tariffs everywhere. And it just shows there's no interest in building up. But right now, Democrats instead are in a different playing field where we are the losers right now. We don't have a majority, and we have a lot of, self-reflection to understand where we went wrong, which is the number one thing that we pointed out at the Rebuild. What Democrats got wrong, which is a lot of it was falling into process instead of focusing on progress, and how we can build from there. And we think a number one issue of that is going to be the cost of living. Trump got very tired about talking the cost of living early on. He even made the joke yesterday that talking about groceries in the term itself is old fashioned, which shows how out of touch he is working in this admin. But it's not out of touch for the average person. You look at your grocery cart, you look online every time you want to buy something, tariffs are going to make that even worse. It's just going to be brought to the front of your eye, and it's something you can't turn away from. So this is where Democrats should be leaning into.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where I love all of what you're saying, but I want to boil a little bit more of what we're leaning into. Obviously, Abundance, came out and saw a lot of, I would say fanfare, but a lot of like pushback of the anti-monopolist. But being the losing party, right, being out of power means a lot of self-reflection and looking at what went wrong. I'm sure you've both read a lot of like Matthew Iglesias and his stuff mentioning about how the previous administration was very against some of the more supply side reforms. And it seems to me that a lot of this abundance agenda or just cost of living agenda really comes down to more. Can you talk a little bit more about what the Rebuild in specific, what you guys are doing about more, right?
Yeah. So one of the things we're doing is we're trying to rebuild the Democratic Party in a more supply-oriented direction. Like, we're not opposed to the social safety net. We think the social safety net is great. But you can't redistribute your way out of a shortage. If there are too few houses, what you need to do is build more housing. And then that actually helps your social safety net, because Section 8 vouchers, for example, go a lot further in a context of housing abundance over housing shortage. And for too long, Democrats got stuck in this idea that you could tax and redistribute and subsidize your way out of all economic problems. Well, a lot of our problems actually have supply constraints right now in really negative ways. Housing is the most obvious one, but it's not just housing. We don't have enough doctors, and that's because of the residency cap. We don't have enough electricity transmission lines. And so that means that the solar energy you can create in places like Arizona and Nevada can't get to often where it's needed, right? We don't have enough of a lot of these things. And so if we want a more prosperous society, we actually have to have more. And the other thing that's really, really important about that is more benefits the people at the bottom the most, right? So, like, my favorite analogy is like musical chairs. So if you think about musical chairs, it's a fun game in third grade because there's like not quite enough chairs for the kids that they gotta fight over it. But like that's not what you want in American political economy. What you want is so many chairs that even the kid with a bum ankle has a chair no problem. Right? Like you want a chair for everybody in American society. And so that's what we're doing is trying to rebuild the Democratic Party in a more economically intelligent, supply-oriented direction. Because that's what's ultimately going to reduce the cost of living. And then when we govern in ways that reduce the cost of living and are effective, we can turn around to voters and say, we govern well, this is why you should vote for us instead of Trump's madness.
I gotta say, I love the chairs analogy. If I remember correctly, was that lifted almost directly from Abundance? The mention of that, or I want to say I heard that one
So
too.
it's been in YIMBY circles for years. And there's actually good research on this done by people like Chris Elmendorf. So there's actually like a lot of research. As with so much in Abundance, much of its intellectual tentacles reach back to YIMBY.
Oh, yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that just because I remember Elmendorf was the UC Davis professor, right? Chris Elmendorf. It's funny hearing like all these things wrapped together. But the thing with the musical chairs, right? I want to say that was in reference to housing. Like cities that build the most housing and have the most, of course, subsequent affordability, have the lowest amounts of homelessness. And when you put all that together, it kind of makes sense. But I want to backtrack a little bit because there's something that you've written a lot about monopolies. And obviously Abundance got a lot of flack for what was that for Teach Out and the whole like, oh, we can just, anti-monopoly our way out of these things and we can redistribute the wealth and then take it from these other guys. And just not seeming to understand that the point is that there isn't enough and that we can just have more. So you had written about real anti-monopolists. So would you expand a little bit more about that?
Sure. Last week I had a piece titled, Will a Real Anti-Monopolist Please Stand Up? Because a lot of the people who brand themselves as anti-monopolist were, they had all these critiques of Abundance, that it doesn't go after corporate concentration. And one of the things that I was pointing out is that things like, so RealPage is a software that uses algorithms to help property owners set prices. And so this is something that a lot of the anti-monopolists were up in arms about in terms of housing. Be like, it's RealPage's fault. Look, if anybody at RealPage or who used RealPage was breaking the law, they should absolutely be prosecuted. But even the highest estimates of RealPage's impact is like only in certain markets, and it was about $50 a month, which is not nothing, but that's not the main driver of high housing costs, right? The main driver of high housing costs is too few homes. And oh, by the way, when you build more homes, what that actually does is it reduces the market power of these corporations who own lots of apartment units, right? Like the way to weaken their leverage is to have lots of supply. And so like more supply is the real anti-monopoly. And you can see this in all kinds of other areas, like certificate of need laws in healthcare. Many states have these laws and they are bananas. They literally say that in order to provide a new medical service, you have to go before a board and prove that there's a need for the service. But in the vast majority of cases, your competitors get to also come before the board and argue that, no, actually there's no need. So, like, imagine if you wanted to, like, set up a new, like, Mexican restaurant and you had to go before a board and get, like, a new Mexican restaurant certificate of need license. But all the other Mexican restaurants got to show up and, like, fight your ability to open. That's crazy. And that happens in healthcare in over half of states. In the state of North Carolina, nearly 20 different medical services are governed under certificate of need laws. We have good research that shows that these laws drive up healthcare costs and drive down healthcare access, particularly in rural settings. Getting rid of those, that's real anti-monopoly. That's part of abundance. That's part of what we've written about as part of our cost of living agenda. Like, that's going to be the true anti-monopoly politics.
I think a lot of that has to do with, well, not a lot has to do, but I think a lot of that addresses those core issues, right? The things that people talk about. People complain that healthcare is too expensive, and then they go, "Oh, well, that's why we need Medicare for all," or "Housing's too expensive. That's why we need public housing," or rent control. It's like, ah, geez, okay, so you're putting a band-aid over a bullet hole. That's not what we're looking for. In that same vein, I want to go back to the housing part and the mention of the Mexican restaurant analogy. I think a lot of that is almost, well, one-to-one with housing. And I want to say, Tara, you're from California, right? Or living in Los Angeles?
I'm originally from New York City, but I do live in LA. Yeah.
And so you're plenty familiar with obviously the Palisades fire and all the homes that are lost that are now caught in permitting hell. And so in that same vein, I want to talk a little bit about the rebuild and moreover the Chamber of Progress, your proposed agenda for fixing these things. I saw that you had written about an Operation Warp Speed for California or Los Angeles, more importantly, after the Palisades. Would you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it was an insane time just because, again, I am from the East Coast, so I've never witnessed a fire of this size before, especially not one that I could just look outside my window and see. So we were literally trapped in the house for a week. And I'm just over here thinking about like how long it is going to take to build here. So I am in like my mid to late 20s right now. I am not at the house buying age yet, but I will be soon. And when we do buy, we would like it to be in California. But seeing the fire happen in Pacific Palisades and Alameda too in Pasadena, you now have affluent displaced refugees entering already a constrained housing market in Los Angeles. It is going to be a bloodbath to try and buy housing here. And also just being familiar with the housing codes and the over reliance on local input in places like Los Angeles, as well as the very exclusionary zoning laws that make it so difficult to put any type of housing outside of just a single family home in Los Angeles was extremely worrying to think about. We've already seen in the past week or so, it was only 4 permits that have been allowed thus far since the fires have happened. And I was watching this on the news, a local channel as well. Also, shout out to local news during this time. They were amazing. They were killing it. And they were asking them for the context of this. They were like, 4, like, that sounds like such a low number. What is this? And they're like, well, if you look at the outscope of how California typically does hand out permits, this does make sense. And it's incredibly frustrating when you have politicians who use now this politically popular abundance like lingo, including like slashing red tape, building more, doing it fast. And you had Newsom capitalize on that quite a bit. For example, he said we are going to remove like the timelines, we are going to build fast and now. And then you click on the build page and you see, what's that little thing there? Oh, it's a 10% cap. That means, sure, you can build faster in the same area where we don't even know if it's environmentally safe to continue building there. And you can just build a slightly larger mansion. Who is that going to help when the housing market is already so strained, where people are already feeling like they have to bleed out, and why you are seeing record numbers of people leaving California, but only the same rich people can build the same houses just slightly larger. So it was just incredibly frustrating to hear them just act as if they are doing the right thing. They are now the new politicians. Newsom went on a podcast with Ezra Klein, and he just had, again, all these workaround answers. And it's just, as someone who lives here and plans to continue living here, you think about the younger generations who are going to continue entering this market and just feel like there's no way to be here. And what's the logical solution for them? To not live here.
Right. Well, I mean, I take it from someone who's been born and raised in California. It's like you watch friends and families move away because affordability, and it isn't anything more than that. Because people love the weather, the culture, the jobs, the you name it, whatever it is, they love it. But it's the affordability. And so seeing like a lot of these co-opted versions of abundance, or we're going to slash the red tape, but then not actually do it, is frustrating because there are states that do it, and I think that's the part that kills me about it, because every time you see a thing from Newsom of, oh, we're going to slash the red tape, you go, okay, well, maybe we're finally going to fix it. Maybe San Francisco's going to permit more than 3 homes this year, but they don't. And I think the most frustrating thing is seeing that it's not happening, especially at such a time of urgency, right? All the homes that were destroyed and all the displaced families. But what is heartening, though, is seeing that other states are doing it.
Yeah.
And in that same vein, I'm hoping that California starts understanding that this is not going to go away if we just keep looking away, right? It's not going to fix itself. Like people are just going to leave, and that's going to be the solution. And that's not a good solution, right? That is a solution for decline. That is a solution for an end of California supremacy, dominance, or just general growth, right? And so in the same vein, I want to talk a little bit about the permitting bills, then the not anti-CEQA, but some of the more CEQA-focused bills going into the California state legislature. Are you familiar at all with like Buffy Wicks and her permitting package?
Yeah, I actually have an entire rebuild piece out on that same package. I was at Sacramento Day, where the day they released that paper, and I had no clue they were releasing it. But just hearing her speak about it, I was like, "Oh my god, I have to go read this on the plane back home." And just going through it was just a lot of like yes nodding in my head, and was just so excited to know that there are politicians out there who are understanding the vast need and how as I mentioned before, it is politically popular right now to say you are going to stand up to special interest groups and build, but people don't do that. They say that there are election seasons, they say that on podcasts, but the second they are, actually elected leaders, it is very difficult to do that. So to hear an elected leader who is not just trying to, get a re-election campaign, but it is something that she's been working on for so long, understand that she is going to get a lot of pushback from this, but knows that the crisis is so dire that she is going to push through, was just incredibly inspiring to hear on my end. And she actually has like a new, one of the recommendations that came out of this report was like ending CEQA CEQA, by the way, is California Environmental Quality Act, which is kind of been weaponized in building as of late. I have a tangent to add on after this, but she has put a bill out to suspend that for infill housing, which is just to build on top of areas that are just not usable, like piles of brick or just like condemned places, which we should not be delaying processes like this. But back to the weaponization of CEQA, Karen Bass, I think it was recent or maybe last year, said on a podcast so like blatantly how she knew that CEQA was a problem and she knew that politicians were using it to their advantage to just put a no, we don't want to build this, by saying that we weren't denying things based on environmental factors, but how they would impact the environment. Basically, the vibes. They were rejecting things based on vibes, and the law was allowing them to.
It's unbelievable, like the weaponization of I guess the weaponization of such a like noble intent law, right? Something that's we're going to protect the environment, right?
We agree. We also want to, but like,
yeah. Who doesn't? I would say I presume both of you read Mark J. Dunkelman's "Why Nothing Works" and "Who Killed Progress." It's in that same vein of just these noble intent laws, like these things that were made for a reason, right? To rein in the expansion of industry and the pollution of the 60s and 70s, right, are now being the problem, right? Obviously the book calls for a little bit more with the Robert Moses stuff, but I'm ignoring that. But the main point being is that they're saying it out loud, right? Bass went on that podcast and just said it. We use this to stop housing. And I think a lot about with these like NIMBY or not in my backyard coalitions, like you have environmentalists and then you have wealthy homeowners and special interests all on the same side. And you kind of wonder, it's like, okay, if all of you are pointing at each other going, hey, we're on the same side, do you not think maybe something's not right here, right? This idea of, oh, we're going to not build this apartment complex because it's going to change neighborhood characters. Like that doesn't seem to be a good idea, right? You're not stopping gentrification. You're forcing all the families who can't afford to live here out. If anything, that's worse. Actually, in fact, we could even argue you are causing gentrification.
Oh, sure. I mean, I see this all the time in Vermont. They've gentrified huge parts of the state. In the town I live in South Burlington, there are these, like, quote-unquote habitat blocks, but, like, they have no ecological justification. They just, like, made them up and put, like, a green sticker on it. But it was really just so that, like, some of the wealthiest people in the state don't have to have their views change because, they put their house on this, like, houses on line. So they can see like Champlain in one direction and the mountains in the other, and they just don't want that view to change because it's a very pretty view. But that's what they want is the view. But they know they're politically sensible enough to know that if they say it was about animals instead of their views, then like that'll take them further. And so that's what they do is they do exclusionary politics and wrap it in the language of environmentalism, and it's very frustrating to watch.
Oh, sure. It's even more frustrating when, especially being a young person. Like I'm 21, right? I've lived in Southern California my whole life, and you hear these things, right? You hear them in passing. You hear, conservatives be like, oh, the people in LA, they want to make us all live in boxes and put us in all little apartments. And you go, okay, well, I don't know if that's true, but okay, whatever, right? You just take it and move on. But then you hear the environmentalists say, oh, we got to stop building this, and eventually you think about it and you go, but why? Why are we fighting this housing complex?
Right. Yeah, it's one of these things where, like, obviously there are some places that are so majestic, so ecologically sensitive, so important to the environment, you shouldn't build there. But what's wrong is to use those kinds of arguments where they don't make any sense. So again, some of the best examples I'm familiar with are around me. I've seen these kinds of environmental arguments used to block housing behind the Lowe's. There's just like some woods behind the Lowe's in South Burlington. Why can't we build some housing?
I did not realize what you meant by Lowe's for a second. Then I'm like, oh, like Lowe's, like the
store.
Yeah,
like the store. like the home improvement store. There's a Lowe's. There's some woods behind it. Some developers wanted to like build some apartments in the woods behind the Lowe's, and you would have thought that like Mount Rushmore was getting spray painted. The way that they acted like this would be vandalism on the landscape, and it's like I get very frustrated with what are obviously disingenuous arguments being thrown out because actually taking care of the environment is important. Actually, climate action is important. And so it's just very, very frustrating to watch nakedly bad faith arguments, use that.
It's especially with the green energy transition. I think a lot about solar and nuclear and adopting all these climate-friendly tech and energy production things. And it's like the solar panels, I guess, is a good example, right? The solar panels in New York City that they're fighting. And I'm like, we're trying to transition our economy to a greener, more climate-friendly economy, but you're fighting solar panels on the city?
All right.
Or any sort of green energy, quite frankly. And it's like I like to use the example of the permitting bill from Manchin and Barrasso.
Yeah.
I want to say this was
Yep.
2024 in the spring. Yeah.
Uh,
I was a Capitol Hill intern at the time, and I remember catching rumors about this bill and reading about it online. And it was,
it's good.
again, I could be getting these numbers wrong, but I want to say it was like a 2% increase or maybe 5% of carbon emissions in exchange for like a 14% reduction from all solar, like and electrical, all the other sorts of green energy. But of course, was it Sunrise movement was there and to just stop oil, and of course the bill goes nowhere. And it's frustrating to see like people not understand just this game theory of like, wait, there's option A and option B, and if you do nothing, it's option A, right? It's very, very frustrating.
It's the it's just basically the belief of just not understanding trade-offs when it comes to advocates like that. Like I like to say, policy, politics, and advocacy are not the same thing. They 100% intersect with one another. But if you want to do advocacy and do advocacy well, you're going to have to understand your policy and you're going to have to understand the politics of your policy. So climate activists always enter the issue or like the problem with not understanding that they have to sow the seed and understand why they should be getting people to understand why their pet policy issue is the right one to do. But instead they show up angry and they bully politicians until a bill is dead, and then you are just left with nothing. And with an issue like climate change itself, like doing nothing is worse because the issue will continue to worsen. Like prior to this job, I was working in carbon dioxide removal technologies, and community input there was extremely difficult, even working in California. And it's like, would you rather to just stop innovation to help, maintain and like lessen the worsening climate issue? Or would you rather just yell about it and then just nothing happens and it just continues to get worse?
I think that can be applied to pretty much any of the, well, or maybe not any, but a decent amount of the advocacy groups. Again, you spend enough time on Capitol Hill, you kind of get the gist of, okay, there are some people who are very serious and they come in, they sit real polite and they have their binder and they explain to the member exactly what their plan is and why it's important and why they should support it. And then you have the people who come in with their phones and the signs and you're like, okay, this is going to be a fun afternoon. But all that to say, I love a lot of what you guys are saying. Pivot back to the housing one, though. Actually, this morning, maybe not this morning, about 6 hours ago, but I saw the mass timber renaissance piece from you, Gary, about the new home technology construction, or not, wow, let me say that again. New-ish housing construction technology, the mass timber, the prefabricated timber production. Can you talk a little bit more about that? I mean, obviously, you have a report out today, too.
Yeah, so we did have a new report out today, too. At the Rebuild, it's the Mass Timber Renaissance, and you can also find it at the Chamber of Progress website. So mass timber is a new building technology, which basically is an engineered wood product, such that you cross-laminate timber so that collectively those pieces are now much, much stronger than individual lumber pieces. Okay, and there's a new technology. The first mass timber building in the United States wasn't until 2011 in Montana. Really didn't take off until the last 4 or 5 years. And it's got all kinds of benefits. For one, it's a way of increasing housing supply because it's great at the 6th floor to 18th floor medium height area because it's stronger than conventional lumber. It's got strength to weight ratios higher than steel and concrete. And so it's great at that. And it saves a lot of cost, too, because you basically do a lot of the fabrication off-site, and then you bring it to the construction site. You basically put it together like a Lego set. And so there's an example we use in the report of an apartment building that went up in less than 3 months. They took on average 9 days a floor. That is lightning compared to a lot of other construction because you're not having to wait for concrete to cure. There's all kinds of ways in which the building gets done faster. And so that saves up cost, saves on time cost of capital. People love the look of mass timber buildings. The exposed wood is something people just love the aesthetics of. So it's not like there's even like this trade-off of like, oh, well, it goes up fast, but it's like ugly. It's like, no. It goes up fast and you like the way it looks. And it sequesters carbon. So it's a new technology, right? Like we're a chamber of progress. We're people who love tech. I get excited about new technologies. It's like where like progress comes from. And so we had this report come out on mass timber and what policy reforms can do to accelerate the rollout. There's NEPA reforms around forest management. There's permitting reforms around oversized loads. There's stuff we can do to beef up the manufacturing. People can go read the report if they want, but there's policy reforms that can help this new technology come out even faster and get the benefits even sooner. So we're really excited about it.
I gotta say, I love that. It's like my favorite thing, of course, whenever you guys make a new report, is that the Chamber of Progress seems to understand that like that tech and innovation is the driver of productivity, right? That this tech, we can innovate our way out of problems, right? We don't have to just accept that there's this finite rule and that's it. It's like let's get creative. You know what? Here's a problem. Let's find a new way to fix it. And I really think that's what's becoming this new dividing line between, people who are pragmatic about their progressivism, right? I see a problem. I see that housings are too expensive, and let's find a way to make a solution, even if it's not perfect. Let's try 6 different solutions, right? Versus let's just do rent control. It's like that's just not helpful. Yeah. But all that to say, I want to pivot back into the rebuild, and we'll go ahead and start to wrap it up. But with the rebuild, right, you've both listed out all these different policy plans and different objectives and different things about making Democrats deliver. What do you see in the future as the, not path forward, but the substantive policy agenda that we're going to run on, right? Obviously, it's still early and it is still 2025. So like a lot of this is just hypothetical, but if you were in charge, what is this new agenda we're running on? Abundance is still being formulated. So what is the specifics, right? Do you see a specific plan, or is it just we're making costs come down and that's it? Like what?
I think when it comes to running on a specific policy plan, you're not going to win in the realm of politics because you have to have a message that people can actually believe in. Like if you go back to the previous campaign, Trump didn't have a specific policy plan outside of Project 2025. And you asked him for plans, he said he had concepts of a plan. What he sold was nostalgia, and he did that well. And it's something conservatives love to do. Like we can go back to the tariffs. He kept talking about we want to go back to the period before the Great Depression and so forth. They just love selling nostalgia, and it really plays out with their base. We are obviously always going to push policy agendas that Democrats should focus on. Gary had one that just came out a couple months ago as a roadmap for Dems as they navigate the next 1 to 2 years. But in terms of the future campaign, I would suggest for Democrats to stay focused on a future forward message. We're only 5% into a Trump presidency, and the negative impacts will be compounding and long withstanding for some time, where he has just kind of, in my optimistic view, handed us the 2026 midterm elections. And I think Democrats will do well by offering not just a path forward, but an alternative. We can't just be the blame party anymore. A lot of people on the very far left do well with their base because there's always something to critique, especially on digital platforms. Like algorithms run on counterculture. They love that. But if you were going to talk to the average person who just is not online, no one wants to be yelled at all the time. No, like people are tired of a resistance party, and we lost a lot of political willpower there. So they do want to have politicians who have easy to understand policy agendas. Like Kamala said 80 times over, she had every single economist on her side, and that still was not enough for people. JD Vance, on the other side, was saying when it comes to housing, immigrants are stealing your house, and that's why you should vote for us because we'll protect it from you. You have to say no. We want to build more housing so that everyone is able to have a more stable and abundant future. Everyone will be able to get paid a wage that they deserve. And you have to counter that with an example and with like I would say a lens. And again, people gave so much flack for Derek and Ezra for coming out with a lens instead of a policy agenda. But I understand it was kind of like an Abundance 101 book. You can't just give people all of these policies and say, here, this will help save America. People are going to be like, says who? Says the experts? Trust in institutions have gone down. You can't just build trust by that again. We need a new playbook.
I mean, speaking of a new playbook, I would just say that Democrats are naturally the party of ambition and change and hopeful optimism, right? Like the most successful Democrat in generations literally ran on a message of hope and change. Like we can actually be successful doing that. A lot of people would like to believe that America's best days are ahead of it and that their own finances' best days are ahead of it and that we can bring costs down and that we can have great jobs and that we can have this like really awesome, bright future. And that requires reform, right? Like you're not going to get a future that's brighter than today without reforming the status quo. And so there is a reform to it. And so that is what I would argue Democrats should lean into, and reform is different from radicalism. This is one of the other things that I would say is like, whereas like Trump wants to take you back 50 years and the far left wants to like burn it all down. Like actually the right lane is use reform where we're going to make things better, but we're not trying to do the French Revolution. Like we're not extremists, but we do want to make change.
It's that thing of we want to make your life better, not worse. We're not going back 100 years, right? Just I want you to have a home that's big and cheap and not $1 million, right? I want you to have energy bills that don't make you want to cry. I want you to go to the grocery store and not like feel like you're gonna have a panic attack. Really kind of strange world we're living in where like that seems to be like the outlandish thing to
Right,
say.
that's the uncool position. I'm like, what are you talking about? That's like the coolest thing there is like making people's lives better.
It's the uncool position online. I mean, like I said, like it is just like feeds fire to say these outlandish statements online because like that's how you build an account and how you build a base. And I think it was a split ticket who had a piece that came out on how people who do as politicians who do very well online typically don't do well like in the actual campaign and tend to lose. And it made me like take a step back and like you have to understand like if a specific sort of people on the internet are rallying for one specific idea, think to yourself, if I just went to my neighbor and brought this idea up to them, what would their response be? If I went to some random person down the street, I wouldn't even say down the street. I live in LA, just middle America, and ask them about that same policy, they might have a completely different outlook than I do.
It's like the I would say like the ultimate like sampling error, if I'm getting that right.
Yeah.
Or yeah, ultimate sampling error. It's like you're taking everything you see online just because our little monkey brain isn't able to distinguish like the little screen of what people say versus what a human being says. It's really is quite interesting because I mean I think especially being a young person, obviously I spent a lot of time around college students who we spend a lot of time online as college students do. A lot of people tend to fall into this, I would say, like a group thing. But again, like they said, that radicalism of just this or it's this, and there's no, there's no reasonable discussion of like what is the plan or like what are we actually fighting for. It's usually just all or nothing, and you're like, okay, well, this is rough.
I completely agree. It reminds me of that meme that went around from like Gen Z 1 and Gen Z 2. I'm definitely Gen Z because I grew up with like Tumblr. Like I remember like the second Obama announcement, like I went on Tumblr that next morning to find out results. And it's like growing up, one being online, and then I went to a very, very leftist college and I was studying political science and public policy, and all I knew were like these internships. But at the same time, I also worked customer service jobs since I was like 14. And I have a family, I'm a first generation American. I have a family who has no connection to politics, no interest in politics at all. They were just trying to make a living for themselves. So sometimes I find myself as a way to like check myself. If I think I am getting a little bit too into the weeds of something, I'll like just like drop an idea in my family group chat to see what they think because like they're more than happy to disagree with me. But it's also good that I check myself and I just don't find myself like yes all of the time because we're just going to continue getting into the weeds and we end up with the result that no one outside of us might agree with.
I gotta say, I love that. I feel the same way. It's like I obviously my family's not very political, but I have an uncle who does not use the internet in 2025 and still has a flip phone.
Love that.
So when I think about stuff, I'm like, let me see what my Uncle Steve thinks about this. And I would say, Uncle Steve, if you're listening, but he doesn't have internet, so he won't be listening. I ask him, and he goes, "Well, that seems like a pretty good idea." Or no, there's just such a simple like nature to it. But just for context, I want to mention to the audience that the Gen Z difference tends to be Gen Z 1 is like the pre-COVID, like graduating high school, like going into young adulthood pre-COVID, and Gen Z 2 is the post-COVID, TikTok, Snapchat, internet generation, which there's a huge divergence.
Yeah, I think Gen Z 1 is even older. So like I graduated in 2020 for college. So that's when like you fully finished school. Like we were entering adulthood as like COVID fully started. And it's just like, oh wow, okay, American dream, that's dead.
Oh yeah. Well, it is quite shocking just because like it's weird that this is the nexus point of just COVID, right? But for a generation, right, of 10, 20 years from 2000 onward, right? Obviously you being on the further side of Gen Z 1, but I'm like at the cusp of Gen Z 1, right? Like my little brother who's 2 years younger is Gen Z 2. Like he doesn't text normally. He's on TikTok all the time and Snapchat. And I'm like, what the hell happened? How did
Oh my God. Speaking to my nieces is like the scariest thing ever. Scariest.
The lingo, you don't understand
it. I'm just laughing at you too because I'm not part of any part of Gen Z. And yet, as a college professor, I've seen all of these like come through as my students, right? So I've definitely seen you see the cultural changes from like the people I first had when I first started teaching in like 2018 through COVID and then post that. And so it's funny how you do see a shift like between the students. And so it's yes, there's definitely a Gen Z 1-2 thing for sure.
100%. And a lot of it comes down to, I mean, I hate it to be like this Mr. Gen Zer, but like it's the screens, it's the internet, it's the TikTok, it's the, and it's terrifying. I will say it's like that. I like to think that social media and these kind of things are going to be or at least our generation's lead paint, the kind of thing where it's like it just kind of cooked our brains. But
so I think some of it's just cultural. I think so. Like at this point, it would be not just like against the rules, but like culturally weird and rude to light up a cigarette in a restaurant. You just wouldn't do it. Like everybody would look around at you like, "What kind of jerk are you smoking a cigarette next to me eating dinner?" And I think there's gonna need to be some like cultural norms pushback on like when it is or isn't okay to like use your phone. Like I'm, old compared to you guys. And so like we did not have smartphones when I was in college. We had more basic phones. And one of the things that I will see people do sometimes is like have their phone out like at a restaurant when they should be talking to people. And I'm like, that's the cultural stuff where we, government's not going to do that for us. We just got to have a reorientation of our culture away from like phone snubbing people. Yeah.
Sounds like we're calling for a rebuild and a reorientation and a restructuring all in one go.
A lot of reads.
Sounds like we could use a redo. Yeah, a reform, a redo. As my dad used to say, we need a mulligan. We need a do-over. But this has been the Chamber of Progress. Tara, Jirari, and Gary Winslett, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Today on Progressive, we got to chat with the Chamber of Progress's Tara Jirari and Gary Winslett. Tara is the Director of Economic Analysis and a rising star in the world of public policy. Tara was previously with the Niskanen Center, working on social policy to uplift. God damn it. Today on Progressive, we got to chat with the Chamber of Progress's Tara Jirari and Gary Winslett. Tara is the Director of Economic Analysis and a rising star in the world of public policy. Tara was previously with the Niskanen Center working on social policy to uplift lower and middle class families. Gary is an assistant professor in the Political Science Department and the International Politics and Economics program at Middlebury College, where he has taught since 2018. His first book, Competitiveness, Death, Trade Politics in the Cars, Beef, and Drugs, analyzes the politics surrounding regulatory trade barriers in the auto, meat, and pharmaceutical sectors. The two of them are currently launching an incredible new blog, The Rebuild, focusing on how Democrats can build more, lower costs, and win again. Check it out.